Um, First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Ray for setting the meeting up. And then I'd also like to point out that I'm not going to talk specifically about any of the Polymer Fluids Group people in terms of postdocs or postgrads. I thought about this, but then if I talk about one, I should be talking about everybody. But you have all been a significant influencer to me, and I hope by the time we get to the end of the talk that you'll understand what I mean by influencer. So what I'm going to talk about is maps and mapping, and I'm going to also talk about so-called SWOT analysis. And the hope is that you will be interested in this, and I've actually learned a lot in preparing this talk about things that I didn't know before I prepared it. So I'm going to encourage you to think. I'm going to talk about myself initially, but equally, I'd like you to be thinking about, well, should I be doing one of these, or would that be useful for me? So I'm going to start with what I would call a big map, and this has got a massive information, and it's far too dense to take into to take in straight away. But what I want you to do is to look at the top on the top blue line and see how I've mapped out my life and the things that I think have been important. So if we, I don't know whether my mouse is working. Is my mouse working with you? So can you see me mousing around?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
Yes.
you can. Okay. Well, let's start with the year and Ken, I've been out aged, which is a surprise because I think Ken is probably older than I. But the most important event in my life, and I think all your lives, is actually when you were born. So I was born in 1947, and so my age was zero, and this is a very important thing because it means that I'm 77. I've started my story, if you like, in 1947. And so, for example, when I was 16 to 18, this was 1963. This was in the middle of the Beatles and the Flower Power and birth control, a social revolution. So it's not only when you're born, but it's the time scale associated with you being at a particular age. So so the year is absolutely crucial that when you start, and I didn't have any influence in when I was being born, and your age is very important, and where you are at any particular stage in your life. Um, and then what I've got is my own major influencers, and the word influencer is of course normally associated with the internet and things like that, but it I can't think of a better word in terms of the people that have really affected your life. And for me, this is very interesting, and I've learned a lot from this. So let's go back to the first column here, global events. Now, these are things that just have happened, and there's nothing that we could do about that. They're just major events, and if you constructed your own map of your life, you might put different major events down on that column. And I increasingly, and as I've sorted out this talk, I've thought that World War II, 1939 to 1945, was a huge global event. although I wasn't even born, because these global events have a long relaxation time, if you like. So the effect of World War II is still being influenced now, but there's a relaxation spectrum, if we want to talk technical, and the memory of World War II lives on for a long time, and that will apply to all of these major global events that have happened in my particular lifetime. So um, there's so much information here. What I'm proposing to do is briefly just take bite-sized chunks of my life, phase one, phase two, phase three, and then phase four, if you like. So let's look at what I'm calling in the beginning. And I think all of your whole experience up to your current time is important and really important, actually. So you are what you are because of your past history, so to speak. And for me, okay, I was born in 1947, so I'm what's called a baby boomer. After the Second World War, there was a sudden splurge of people being born. So I'm one of those, and I was born in Ipswich, and the major influences for me, of course, is my mother and my father. Whoever brought you up, and in whatever circumstances, they must have been your major influences. And so here's my father, he made cement. Here's my mother, and she was a remedial school teacher. So there have been other influences along the line, but of course, in the beginning, somebody's got to you can't influence yourself. So your parents or whoever brought you up were the key players. Now, when I was 16, well, I went to technical school rather than a grammar school, and that's quite significant for the background in terms of the background understanding that I had. I did metalwork, woodwork, engineering, drawing, and I didn't do any languages, for example. So the location is important, and the location actually for me was important when my father moved from the Thames area making cement to help build a new cement works in Westbury in Wiltshire. And so this meant that I changed friends, I changed everything. My world changed, and I went to Bath Technical College, and this was in a period, as I've said, which whoops, sorry. This was at a period which was um, a social revolution. The 1960s was an absolute social revolution. I put the Beatles, but it could have been a number of groups, etc. Flower power, and in particular birth control. So this was I don't say the beginning of emancipation, but this was a huge thing in terms of being able to control when you're going to be actually born. So um, very important. And so in terms of science, well, I went to Leicester University. And why did I go to Leicester University? I now realize I went to Leicester University because at the time, all physics departments in the UK, or most physics departments in the UK, insisted that you could read German because many of the scientific papers at that time were in German. And Leicester University was one of the few universities that allowed you to read do physics as a first degree without German. Really weird, but that's the way it was. And when I was at Leicester, we learnt all about the transistor, but we didn't have any devices. Everything that I'd done in my lifetime and my father's lifetime had been done with slide rules. So there were no calculators as such. So the transistor it was the birth of what we've now seen in terms of major developments. So, and we did lectures on the transistor, but we didn't have we didn't have anything to play with in terms of transistors. So that's the beginning, but it set the scene to some extent. But my real learning phase was when I went to Bristol. So Bristol was a real huge experience for me, and that changed my life, and it was because I was influenced by what I would call my own major influences. And the key influences was Sir Charles Frank, um, and I should say, and his wife Maeta. Maeta, Charles was not an easy person to get to know, and Maeta, who actually came out of Russia, and they both met um, in Cambridge during the war. Maeta had the ability to sort of humanize Charles. Charles was a lovely, lovely person and absolutely brilliant person, but he wasn't easy to get to know. And the other person that had such a huge influence on me was again a Hungarian refugee escaping from Stalin, coming to the UK, Andrew Keller, who was driven by science, driven by polymers, and just driven. And I ended up working sort of finding myself, and not knowing it at the time, finding myself in the middle between Charles Frank and Andrew Keller, and sort of learning from both of them in quite different ways. So my life influences has definitely been Charles Frank and Andrew Keller. So also another life influencer is meeting Margaret, who's been wonderful and looked after me during both the good times and the bad times. So there we are together. This is probably when we were in our early 20s. And here we are again at Cambridge, now with children, Sophie and Emily. And having young children, we had children when we were 22. Having young children again changed my life and had a huge influence, because I then had realized that I had responsibilities, and not least to provide enough funds for the family. So in terms of influencers, Margaret, Charles Frank, and Andrew Keller were the key people. There are other names, and I just don't have the time to go through everybody. But anyway, family pressures took me to Sussex University to a lectureship for 3 years, and there, um, again, it was curious. I met a control engineer, a Dr. Graham Knott, um, who was working on wave energy devices, and that's where the oscillatory flow work was the genesis for the oscillatory flow work. So there I was in material science, and Graham was in control engineering, and we were working together on the fluid mechanics of unstable, low viscosity fluids. So it's a funny old world, but there we go. Now, also at Sussex, I can remember. So this is, let's say, 76. There was a science policy research unit, and they were talking about this thing called IT, and that IT was the future. And at the time, I didn't know what IT was, and I thought, well, what's IT? What's IT about? But anyway, they were right. The computer revolution was had already started, and following on from solid state devices, computers, we then moved to IT technology. So now I've got to Cambridge, and so I was 32 when I went to Cambridge, and was I 32? Is that right? Yeah, I think I was 32, and I now realise that I was in Cambridge for 32 years, which is an incredibly long time. And I also realise what a privilege it is to have been there for such an extended period. Most undergraduates and postgraduates and researchers, if they're lucky, might have 5 years, but I had 30 years, 32 years of Cambridge. So if we look at the pictures, I became a fellow of Robinson College, and this is a picture of Robinson on a wet day. This is where we lived, 32 Chesterton Hall Crescent, and I hope some of you who are listening to this will remember nice parties and Margaret's food in particular at 32 Chesterton Hall Crescent. A lovely family house, a beautiful place to bring up young children. And in general, we had a lot of fun. This was the fun excursion that this was Judith Hann of Tomorrow's World, and Robert Marshall, the technical officer at the time, and we were playing with flexible chocolate, and that was a wonderful little period at Cambridge. I'm putting down here. I don't quite. Oh, I mentioned Francois. This is we're now. This is last year. Photographed last year. Here's Margaret, still beautiful and lovely. Jean-Francois Agusant. I won't say he's beautiful and ugly and lovely, but he's a very good friend now, and myself. And this is us in Nice last year. And we're fortunate enough to have a holiday or an apartment now in Antibes, which is just at the back there. So, so who are my main influences in Cambridge? Well, the head of department, Professor John Davidson, was um, a huge influencer. I would like to describe John Davidson as a benevolent dictator, and that is actually a compliment. John actually had a hard edge to him underneath. He looked very mild and meek, but he had quite a hard edge. And for 20 years, he was my head of department, and very able person, and a significant influence. The other person, or one of the other persons who had a great influence on me was Lord Jack Lewis, who was the warden of Robinson. He had an uncanny way of just dealing with people. So he was just a superb way of handling individuals, and I have the greatest respect for him. Then we come to Sam Edwards, and this is an interesting story in a way because when I arrived at Cambridge, the polymers were not particularly well thought of. In fact, the chemists didn't rate them at all, and the arrival of Sam and his high-level mathematics and his just general high level of ability suddenly elevated polymers from, or to say suddenly, yes, I think it was suddenly, elevated polymers to being respectable at in Cambridge. And I rode that wave. So my timing in a way was perfect because he arrived just a couple of years before I arrived. So I owe Sam Edwards a lot. I've mentioned Ed Cussler. I don't know if Ken knows Ed Cussler, but he is one of the most fantastic lecturers and articulators of chemical engineering on the basically on the planet at the moment. He's a very charismatic sort of person, and he came over on sabbaticals to Cambridge and was very well received and made a huge contribution. Jeff Mogridge in particular, and him, they developed a thing called product design, which became very popular. So I haven't got time to go through all of my industrial links, and very happy to comment if anybody has any questions about them. But I want to mention Stephen Aldhouse because he was a very interesting character, and he was there significant in the early 80s. Um, Stephen worked for BP, and and BP actually gave him early retirement, and that's probably the politest way to put it, at a very early age. He was probably about 45. He he was unable really to communicate with BP properly, although he knew exactly what he was doing and had the right ideas. And it was Stephen Aldhouse who alerted me to the importance of characterizing polymer melts. At the time, they had a real technical problem on batch processing of getting reproducibility of different polymers. And he realized that just shear thinning data was inadequate, and that you really did need to characterize the rheology of polymers in a much more careful way. And this resulted in him having the first rheometrics rheometer that could measure linear viscoelastic properties at elevated temperatures. First rheometer in the UK that you could measure linear viscoelastic properties. And so Stephen had all the right ideas, but he was very tensorish and wanted to talk in tensors, and BP didn't understand about tensors, and so they didn't really understand him. But he had the right message, and in fact, the MPR came out of, in a way, came out of Stephen Aldhouse's ideas, or wanting to have a rheology device that could run alongside a reactor. So that actually was the birth of the MPR. I could spend a whole talk, a whole session on chocolate, but I won't. And so what can we say about what happened? What big global events? Well, mobile phones. Falkland War is a very special one for Brits, I suppose, and myself. For some reason or another, I felt that was a big thing. It wasn't a big thing nationally, but the Twin Towers, of course, I'm pretty sure that we can all remember exactly what we were doing when the Twin Towers came down. I know what I was doing. I was with Sopark somewhere at Nestle. And he on a bus, and he said, oh, something terrible's happened in the USA. So I'm sure we can all touch, that touches a nerve with everybody, with all of us, in terms of global events. So now let's go to the grey phase, which is different. So end of 34 years, 34 years at Cambridge. I had a severe attack of shingles, and Margaret says you're working too hard, and maybe playing too hard as well. And so I took retirement, and for the last 14 years, I've been living in Salcombe, of which this is a picture of Salcombe viewed from our own home, which is a lovely, lovely house, and we're in a lovely position. So we're very lucky. And um, I've had a complete new range of influences in there, and in fact, most of them I would put at the end that they were friends. If I look back at my Cambridge time, I had colleagues. but I didn't necessarily have many friends. And so now I have a really nice group of friends who contribute to the way I'm thinking and the way I'm behaving, which is really nice. In terms of global events, well, we've all experienced COVID, so that has to be a common, wherever we are, we've all experienced COVID, and we are all experiencing the Ukraine war, and maybe this will come to an end more quickly than perhaps I would have thought even 7 days ago, but who knows? Um, so, so now we're in the now, and this comes back to Ken's comment, I think, really. I don't feel competent to say anything about the future because I'm no longer at the coalface. Um, oh, hang on. What I do want to say is something. Where do I want to put AI in? Hang on. No, okay, sorry, I apologize. Anyway, so no, we're in the now at the moment, and I can't predict what we're going to see in the future. However, I would say that the mapping out of your life is something of real value, and you can help, and it helps you understand um, a little bit about the now because you've understood a bit more about the past. Um, and so I'll also just briefly talk about a SWOT analysis. Now, I don't know whether you all know about SWOT analysis. It's a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So, in terms of the future or state of play at the moment, I'm I'm going to construct a little SWOT analysis or my own SWOT analysis. I'll be interested to see your own SWOT analysis. But I'd like to tell you the story of how I came about SWOT analysis. And that relates to the fact that at one stage I was deputy warden of Robinson, and the then warden of Robinson was not Lord Lewis. It was a man. A, a, it was oh, hang on, I'll get there. Um, David Yates. It was a man called David Yates who had been a previously chief executive of Baker McKenzie, which is a huge law firm, both in the USA and in Europe and in the UK. So David Yates, I was in the process of I was in the process of preparing a future plan for Robinson College, the next 30 years, because I'm glad to say that colleges can think that far forward. And I presented this to David, and I can remember exactly, he looked at me and said, well, where's your SWOT analysis? And I didn't know anything about SWOT analysis, and I felt very humbled, and Julie went away, found out what a SWOT analysis was, and Julie did a SWOT analysis. But it's a simple strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So here's my own SWOT analysis for the world at the moment, and this is immensely ambitious and riddled with potential errors and things and in inclusion or disclusions. But anyway, I think it's worth doing, and I would be interested to see what you all the people who are prepared to listen to me have to say in terms of their own SWOT analysis. It doesn't have to be the world; it could be of yourself, or it could be of the company that you might be working for, or the organization that you're working for. But I think it's a worthwhile thing. And actually, I was very surprised at what I ended up with saying. So these were spontaneous thoughts, and this is the world. So it can't get any bigger than this. Well, it can if you're Elon Musk, I presume. But anyway, strength. the world's ability to muddle along, and I use the word muddle, it's just that the world just does muddle along. And what do I put as the weakness? The world's inability to work together. Now, maybe global warming might help here, but to say I'm not obsessed, but there are wars. The history it's a history of wars between different nations and people unable to work together. And maybe one's seen an example of that in the last big election that came along. I don't know whether that was the UK or the USA, but these were big elections. So the world's ability to muddle along, but a weakness is the world's inability to work together. Then inevitably, as scientists or engineers, we must think about the strengths of science and engineering. And I think science, medical advances, for example, are a fantastic example of a strength of science. And actually, thinking about this, and then I thought about medical advances, then I thought about DNA, and then I thought about all of the synthetic polymer stuff that I've seen in my lifetime, and I'm actually pretty proud because I think the synthetic polymer understanding, the understanding of synthetic polymers has helped the understanding of biological polymers. Um, in a significant way. So I think the synthetic polymers have played a real role in advances in the medical advances. So I'm feeling comfortable that yes, polymers and rheology and if you like, the sort of things that we've been studying have made a positive application. But of course, with every strength of science, there's a potential weakness, and or not yet a weakness or bad actors. And so, for example, tanks have now been taken over by drones and things like that. So let's do, let's move very quickly here. Strengths. The internet, of course, is a strength, but in my opinion, it's also a weakness. This is a really funny one, and I don't know that people will agree with this or even understand what I'm trying to articulate. But for some, the realization cash is not always king is important, and that's a strength. Whereas unfortunately, an awful lot of people on the planet think cash is king, and to some extent it is. So the 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 value of cash for nations and individuals is a complicated one. Strength, I talked about John Davidson being a benevolent dictator, and actually, I think that's not a bad idea because democracy has its problems, but equally, autocracy, a despot is not a good thing. So you can go on with opportunities and threats, and oh well, I think here, okay, I've got to mention, I must mention AI because this is, we've had the solid state devices, computers, IT, and now we've got AI, and so AI is is the next big thing to come. And I have been trying unsuccessfully with the Royal Academy of Engineering to say, well, look, you should also look at AI in terms of its downside, the weaknesses. At the moment, it's rather like the Wild West, and so and I've totally failed. Well, I don't say I've totally failed, but I've pretty well failed. People are worrying about the threats of AI, but it should be a much more balanced approach in terms of looking at the positives and definitely the negatives. So there we go. I think I'm going to conclude. I don't want to go on for too long. Uh, I, I'm inviting the group to actually draw their own map of their life, uh, and I'm also inviting the group to do their own SWOT analysis. And maybe in the future we could, if you want to share them with me, I'd be absolutely delighted. But if you wanted to share them with the whole group, again, that would be quite fun. So I'll conclude by sort of wrapping up with Ken Waters again comment to say I hope this has maintained your interest and you've actually even enjoyed what I've had to have what I've had to say. And I think I'm going to stop at that point and invite somebody else to say something. So thank you for anyway for your attention, if you have been attentive. Thank you.